Usually, children's book writers have a certain wholesomeness that would lead you to believe that they would likely be good parents or, at the least, like children. Little did anyone know that was absolutely not the case for one certain author. Whenever people read a book geared towards children, it's usually done under the assumption that the author probably has some sort of genuine passion for kids. Whether it's for their development, their well-being, or just their general health and usual, you would hope that they would have the best intentions. Sometimes, though, that just isn't the reality, and they could be a completely different person than you'd imagine behind the scenes. Today's story is about Jennifer Wolfthal, a 45-year-old woman who wrote a children's book that was met with some critical acclaim, one called A Real Friend. To learn more about Jennifer's upbringing, let's take a look at her own brief author profile on Amazon. Jennifer Wolfthal grew up in sunny South Florida, United States. As a child, you would find her immersed in anything creative, drawing, dancing, and playing teacher with her stuffed animal students. This passion for teaching and creativity followed her into her adult years as she graduated from the University of Central Florida with a BA degree in elementary education. For the next 8 years, Jennifer taught 4th grade in public school. During those years, she enjoyed instilling a love for writing in her students and found picture books to be a beautiful medium to accomplish this goal. She continued her teaching journey through homeschooling her own children. Currently, she resides in Central Florida with her husband Joseph and their 3 children. As the description says, Jennifer, during her career as an elementary school teacher, got married to her husband, 43-year-old Joseph Wolfthal, who was an engineer working at Lockheed Martin, a massive defense and aerospace manufacturer. The two would go on to adopt 3 children together, 2 girls and a boy. At the time of this story, the 3 children were 8, 9, and 11 years old. Even though Jennifer had been a school teacher, she decided to leave her job and homeschool the kids instead. Jennifer's book, A Real Friend, was published in 2020. It was a book about 2 kids named Max and Benny who got into an argument. As a result, one of the boys tries to build a new friend. But in the end, the 2 main characters got over their fight and started being friends again. The book was described as a recognizable picture book about playing together, quarreling, and patching up a quarrel. After the success of this book, Jennifer began to write another one called Corabelle's Butterfly that was all set to release in 2021. However, after the horrid details of her home life eventually came to surface, that release date would never come to be. Given that Jennifer had decided to homeschool her kids, most people outside of the home had no real idea of how they were being treated. After all, they were completely dependent on Jennifer and Joseph to leave the house at all and weren't going to be seen at school. In addition, Jennifer and Joseph had been neglecting their doctor's checkups as well, for reasons that will definitely become more clear, and that made for an even smaller pool of people who might ever see the kids. The life that these 3 kids experienced at home was nothing short of hellish, and occurred day in and day out. For one, food was always a problem. The kids were only fed one sort of food. Jennifer and Joseph would simply pour some cereal, vegetable puree, which is a smooth, liquid-like mixture of mashed vegetables, and water into a bowl. They would then stir it up and give it to the kids every single meal, treating it more like feeding a pet than a human being. Even with this being their only option for food, the kids were still lucky if they were given all of their meals. Sometimes the 2 parents would simply, for whatever reason, refuse to feed them until late in the afternoon, resulting in the kids only getting 1 or maybe 2 meals a day that definitely didn't amount to their daily necessary intake. Even so, the children were so sick of the disgusting mixture of food that, even while starving, they still couldn't bring themselves to eat it at points. This would only lead to punishment. They would face quite a wide variety of different punishments by the parents for nearly any minor offense one could make, or simply because the 2 parents were angry and felt like taking it out on the kids. One of the most common punishments for the kids would be that they would have to exercise to the point of exhaustion. Given that there was always something to be punished for, nearly every night would conclude with the kids being forced to do squats endlessly by their desk until they simply couldn't continue anymore. Despite the family seeming to not be religious, Jennifer would tell the kids that they couldn't stop sinning, with her seemingly implying that they were sinning against their parents. The kids were also forced to write out various phrases as punishment, sometimes thousands of times. One of the most common things that they would write after being punished, being written well over 1,000 times by one child alone, was, "My body stays flat on the bed at all times. I was never given permission to move or say anything else. Now I get to write about this along with everything else. I'm a fool. Jennifer and Joseph weren't above using physical punishment towards the kids either. They showed a particular sadistic enthusiasm for an object that they called the whacker. While it isn't quite known what exactly the whacker was, it has been described as some sort of oblong object that the couple wrapped in a cloth, likely hoping that it would prevent the item from leaving marks. That was anything but the case, as the couple would often strike the same parts of their bodies so many times in the same place that they would draw blood and leave open, untreated wounds all over the kids. One of the kids once asked for bandages for their wounds, which angered the parents and resulted in yet another beating. After that, they all simply stopped asking. As if a lack of food, exercising to the point of exhaustion, and being beaten weren't enough, Jennifer and Joseph weren't content to stop there. The parents, for some reason, were also very strict about controlling the children's bathroom habits. The three were only allowed to go to the bathroom at certain times, sometimes twice a day, but usually less. Aside from those scheduled, permitted times, the kids were not allowed to enter into the bathroom. Instead, all three of them were forced into wearing diapers for the majority of the time, despite all of them being well beyond the age of being potty trained. Most of the time, they would simply give up and use the diapers instead of asking to use the restroom in fear of being punished even more. Even despite being forced to wear these diapers, the kids wouldn't be allowed to shower or bathe for weeks at a time. In fact, the kids have since said that they didn't even hear their parents showering but once in a long while. Usually every night, as yet another form of punishment, the kids would have cold water poured over them as they slept in bed. To make things worse, they didn't even have any bedding to begin with, sleeping on rubber mattresses with a pillow with no case. They weren't even allowed to clean off the water, leading to them trying to covertly drink the water around their heads so that they could at least sleep on their side. It seemed that Jennifer liked this punishment in particular, enjoying watching the kids squirm afterwards. The kids said that while Joseph was there, he didn't seem to care to help them. Not content with how freezing cold the kids were already, Jennifer would force them to sleep with large, loud box fans near their beds at night. This was done for two reasons. One of the reasons was to make them even colder and simply pile on the torture. One of the other reasons was so that the kids couldn't hear the parents interacting with the other children, and so that they couldn't even whisper to communicate with each other at bedtime. This was never foolproof though, as the kids could still hear each other being screamed at throughout the night along with the cries of their siblings. Over time, it had been years since any of the kids had seen anyone outside of their own home. One of the daughters has said that she was forced to keep track of the days and months by counting in her head, afraid to even write them down and face punishment for whatever arbitrary reason. After long enough, the kids were too scared to even leave their room and venture out into the rest of the house itself. Their room became a makeshift dungeon, and the kids were doomed to a life of merely existing in a quiet room, waiting for their adopted parents to get angry, storm into that room, and torture them again at any given moment. For years and years, this would all continue. While the parents had stopped letting their kids get medical care entirely or risk having their abuse being exposed, this all changed when one of the kids, the 8-year-old daughter, the youngest, ended up right on death's door. This brings us to New Year's Day 2021. After Jennifer's adopted 8-year-old daughter became unresponsive, she and Joseph decided that they had no choice but to bring her out to the hospital. Taking her to the Advent Hospital in Winter Park, Florida, the doctors were quickly overwhelmed with the severity of the case. The staff quickly realized that this was far above and beyond a simple urgent care visit and instead had the girl transferred to another location, to a hospital equipped with a pediatric intensive care unit. The girl was quickly found to have been suffering from a good number of medical issues. For one, she was experiencing both kidney and liver failure at once. She also had pneumonia in both lungs, sepsis, and a staph infection. In addition, she was suffering from numerous open, infected wounds on her legs, a large bump on the back of her head, 2 black eyes, and broken front teeth. She was found to barely weigh 40 pounds, which is very underweight for her age. Given how severe the case was, the medical staff immediately called the police to come get a read on the situation. The authorities made their way out to the hospital and met with a Child Protective Services agent. The cops first came across Joseph and questioned him about the events leading up to the girl's hospitalization. While talking, Joseph mentioned that he needed to go home because the other 2 kids had been left there alone. Very concerned that the couple were treating their other kids in the same way, the police arrested Joseph on the spot. They then made their way out to the family home and picked up the other 2 kids to take to the hospital for their own checks. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Jennifer was arguing with medical staff about what had happened to the kids. She told the doctors and nurses that all of the girl's injuries were simply due to unfortunate timing, with the girl just happening to have a series of falls and mishaps in the weeks leading up to the visit. They didn't believe her. Instead, she added that the girl's broken front teeth were caused by brushing her teeth too hard. They believed that claim even less. The police wrote that the claims didn't even make any sense, saying, "Due to the height and weight of the girl, it is not likely the swollen bruise on the back of her head and the laceration on her lip and broken tooth were caused by off-balance falls." Shortly after, Jennifer was also arrested and taken into police custody. The other 2 children left back at the family home were found to be in what has only been called a horrific state upon arriving at the hospital. While the youngest daughter was definitely in the worst shape currently, the other 2 were barely doing much better. One of the kids was in the hospital for a week, being treated for their numerous open wounds, their malnutrition, bruising, and various skin infections. The other child was in the hospital for 2 weeks due to the same symptoms, although this child also needed what is called refeeding from the hospital. This meant that they were so malnourished that they needed to get used to eating food again slowly or risk shock to the system. After those 2 kids were released from the hospital, they were given a care plan to continue their recovery. They were then placed into a foster family who was given their treatment plan in order to help out. Once the 2 kids were well enough, they were asked to come out to a local kids' house advocacy center for some follow-up interviews on what they had experienced. To start, the 2 opened up by saying that their mom and dad were not nice people. Given how little of the world they knew outside of their own bedroom, it's likely that they didn't even realize how much of an understatement that was. They began to explain all of the abuse they routinely experienced to the police. Everything from the food, the item they called the whacker, the writings, the exercise, the cold water, everything. As police continued their investigation at the house, they found more evidence for the rest of the abuse that wasn't so immediately apparent with their injuries. This included things like the thousands and thousands of phrases that the kids had to write continuously as punishment. They also found that the locks on the bedroom door were backwards, meaning that the parents were likely locking them in from the outside. After the interviews and the investigation, the police asked the parents for comment. Joseph simply responded with, "Can I call my attorney?" Given Jennifer and Joseph's good careers and the passion for childcare that they both seemingly shared, both members of the community and people who had read Jennifer's book were shocked to hear how they actually treated their own kids. It isn't too often that someone making happy, feel-good stories for children is actually keeping kids locked up in their own makeshift dungeon, after all. Jennifer Wolfthal was arrested on charges of aggravated child abuse and neglect. Joseph was hit with very much the same charges, with his also including a charge of false imprisonment. However, 3 weeks later, Jennifer was arrested a second time while in custody with the charges of false imprisonment added to her case as well. Even all these weeks later, their 8-year-old girl was still in the hospital while the other 2 were getting used to foster care. Joseph's arrest report noted that the police hoped for him to not have any more contact with his wife and kids if he happened to be released. A judge set his bail at $210,000, which it seems that he was unable to pay. After all of the news came out, Jennifer's writing career came crumbling down almost instantly. This led to her privating her website and shutting down her social media as quickly as possible. All over the internet, on any website that sold her books, her works were getting review bombed. Many of these reviews were notifying potential buyers about what she had done, urging them not to support such a monster. The publisher of the book, Clavis Publishing, wrote a statement about the whole ordeal on Google Books fairly shortly after everything came to light. They stated, "We were made aware of horrific news regarding one-time Clavis author Jennifer Wolfthal's arrest and strongly condemn child abuse, abandonment, and neglect today and always." In court, the judge made it clear that the couple very well could be facing more than 100 years in prison based on the severity of the charges. However, before it could come to that, both Jennifer and Joseph decided that they would take a plea deal. In exchange for a much, much lesser sentence, they would plead guilty to what they had done. In 2024, their trial would finally come to a conclusion. Throughout the court case, neither of the two had anything to say at all beyond their pleas. The prosecutor said in a statement that, luckily, all of the children were living with a different family now and had no further contact with their parents. After a while, it came time for their sentencing. As a part of their plea deal, they ended up with much less than 100 years. Joseph was sentenced to a total of 10 years in prison. Jennifer, with her seeing as taken more of a lead in the abuse, was sentenced to 12 years. Neither of their attorneys have given any comment on the outcome. The state attorney's office said, "This plea and sentencing agreement ensures that the Wolfthals will spend significant time in prison while it protects the already traumatized victims from the stress of having to testify." The judge himself said, The state attorney's office made sure law enforcement and the children's new guardian supported this sentence before it agreed to it. It seems that the children's new family simply wanted to get past the whole case and finally get to a sentencing so that the kids could finally move on with their lives. It has been said that the kids are in much better health now, luckily all surviving and are happy with their new family. Jennifer Wolfthal's book is still listed on Amazon, but it has been removed from sale. Online records still show that, despite all that has happened, the book is still available for checkout in libraries all throughout the US and Canada. It's very likely that these libraries simply aren't aware of the kind of person that the wholesome children's author turned out to really be behind the scenes. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give me a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Just recently, I've opened up a merch store. There you can get yourself some cool Dire Trip t-shirts, coffee mugs, posters, and other stuff as well. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media. If anything were to ever happen to the channel, that would probably be the only way you'd ever hear about it. I also really appreciate when people subscribe to my Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are up too, and you can get the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.